Welcome to Night City, the home of Cyberpunk 2077, which may be the most hyped and anticipated game of all time. By now I'm sure you've heard about the game that debuted to mixed reviews and controversies. And for all the controversies surrounding the game, it's still a massive gaming success. Despite debuting in an arguably incomplete state, a recent PC Gamer article states that more than 13 million copies have sold. And if you still trust controversial developer CD Projekt Red, that includes digital and retail refunds. So this must be a good game at its core, right? I'll give you all the deets for the PC version in its current state right after this. If this is your first time to our channel or videos, welcome. If you like what you see here, please consider helping us grow by liking, subscribing, commenting, or even sharing this video. For a small channel like this one, it helps immensely, and I appreciate any feedback you have. Thanks to everyone that's supported the channel. To thank you, I'm doing a new giveaway, this time for a Nomad starter package. To be eligible to win, you just have to comment on one of my videos and be a subscriber to the channel. When we hit the subscriber goal of 400 subs, I will draw a winner. Thanks and good luck.
It's a long story. I don't quite know how to tell you. Where to even start?
Welcome back. So I wrote this review initially when the game debuted, and that was a rocky time during my first 30 hours. Unfortunately, due to all the controversies and bugs, I was divided on whether to put out a review or not, as we knew patches were coming that would most likely alter the experience. But I figured the developer released this game for mass consumption in its current form, so it's only fair that we review what they gave us, what I paid for. And despite the problems I had running this game, I found myself unable to put it down, as I think many of us are experiencing. So I started working on this review, already divided and drawing conclusions, as I worked through to the second act. And then something unusual happened.
Oh, he's in rough shape, but alive.
I started to change sections I wrote as my feelings on the game were changing the longer I played it. As I was so hooked, I had to get through this game to the end. Now with over 100 hours in, I can honestly say my opinions evolved and changed on this title, so I think it's the right time to review it. I know this review may be a bit overdue, but there's a lot of layers to the game and story. Cyberpunk 2077 is the story of V, our main character in the game. He or she is a cyborg with special abilities you can upgrade and enhance as the game develops. The trailer for this game does the best job of giving us an overview, which I'll have the link for in the description. This is how they describe V and the world of Night City that the game is set in.
The year is 2077. An economic crisis culminating in nuclear conflict has left America in pieces. With most of the continent degenerating into lawless war zones, people from all over have converged on the already overcrowded Night City, one of the world's last great megalopolises. A hub amassing the best in resources and know-how, and home to manufacturers of cutting-edge technologies, Night City continues to offer the promise of a civilized future. But in the city's streets, a merciless struggle for power rages. Gangs, corporate agents, hustlers, religious cultists, politicians, and all manner of criminals strive to outplay one another. Ordinary people get caught in the crossfire. In this world, consumed by never-ending conflict, sometimes only an outsider will get the job done.
Elizabeth tells me you have answers for us. I'm all ears.
And that's you, an urban mercenary, a cyber-enhanced gun for hire.
We seem to understand each other. Take this, too.
As a mercenary, you swear no allegiance. You've chosen the outlaw life and trust that your abilities will carry you up Night City's ruthless, underground social ladder.
Pretty cool, right? As it seems like you'll have a lot of options to develop your V and his or her story in Night City. Which, on the surface, seems like a really open world to live out your cyberpunk fantasies. And just like the role-playing games it's based on, style is a big part of your character's experience. Each of the 3 life paths have their own unique styles, which is expressed in the clothes and the cars. Which there's a huge variety of each. But you're not locked into a particular one, because your V is a nomad, street kid, or corpo. So to that degree, this game is very open. But it's not exactly the open experience I was expecting, based on the press and trailers, and we'll dive into that as we break down this game some more.
So, not bad, huh? Now we can get down to biz.
And let's start the breakdown with the graphics, a real strength for Cyberpunk 2077. This game really takes advantage of ray tracing if your graphics card can do it. If not, I think you're still going to have a great experience with the visuals on a GTX card. So hats off to the developers here. Night City looks gritty, dark, and sometimes even vibrant. Some of that goes into world design, but the graphics bring it home, which is a big part in selling a world convincingly. It's also why the bugs are so fatal. But if your rig can run Cyberpunk 2077, you're in for a lot of eye candy. If you're going to do a game in first person, it needs to be on point, and this is. At least on the PC version, as the main characters also look great, and you'll probably find yourself picking favorites. If you spend a lot of time in an area, you can also really appreciate the level of details that were added. From the slums to the mega towers, even V's apartment is a world of its own, keeping true to the cyberpunk lore. If I had to knock anything about the graphics, it's gotta be the NPCs. They spend a lot of time on the main characters and making them look great, but there's only what feels like a handful of variations on the NPCs for each type. So that part feels rushed, and by the third act it gets old fast. They can fix this in future patches, but I doubt it's even on their radar. Despite that, I'm all in on the graphics and can forgive the NPCs to give this a 5 out of 5 for graphics.
Welcome to the next generation of open world adventure. Immerse yourself in Cyberpunk 2077.
Open world adventure. That's the key word I think we all missed here. One of the selling points for this game was that it was supposed to do some things we haven't seen before. And there's a lot of mechanics to unpack here, but I'm not sure I'm seeing anything new here. I might call it a marriage of elements that worked from other successful games. Like the story and decision making reminds me of old BioWare games, like the Mass Effect trilogy or Knights of the Old Republic games, which were really just choose your own adventure books on steroids, where your choices will affect the storyline to a degree. We'll discuss that more in the story section, but the mechanic and dialogues will seem familiar to you. The hacking mechanic in combat will also remind you of these games, but on a much deeper level. You are rewarded for being as stealthy as possible, so there are elements of the Hitman and Splinter Cell games here. We are trying to be sneaky and dump victims' bodies out of sight to remain undetected. However, I should point out that this is purely optional, unlike the other two games I mentioned.
Drop your weapon!
You can go in guns blazing every time if that's your style. There's jumping and climbing that reminds me of the Mirror's Edge games. And of course, anytime there's driving around and carjacking in what appears to be an open world, you can't help but think of the GTA series. But that's really the only parallels you can make between these two games. Cyberpunk is a completely different experience from Grand Theft Auto. Although I would not have minded a GTA in the Cyberpunk world, especially when it comes to the decision to play V in the first person. I guess you can argue it's more immersive this way, but I'm with a lot of gamers that wanted a third-person experience instead. Or at least the option. I do think the PC modding community will make this happen if CDR does not in future releases. Cutscenes, the dialogue, and story also happen from the first person. It does a good enough job of making you feel like you're in a Cyberpunk movie, when there's no glitches. It's an interesting take on a storytelling that leans heavily on the cutting-edge graphics. You are more limited on your housing options than the trailers lead you to believe, which is unfortunate. I'm wondering if they did not have enough time to develop this. The wide range of vehicles you can obtain is a real plus I also enjoyed. However, none of the flying vehicles you see are an option to own. Who knows, maybe that'll come in DLC. There's looting and crafting mechanics here also, which are not strangers to RPGs. You can engage in as little or as much of this as you want. But if you want the nice toys like fast rides, weapons, and augmentations, you'll need to dabble a little into this. Although some special vehicles and weapons are unlocked inside storylines. And speaking of character modification, there's a deep character customization system that was a little tricky at first for me. You can allocate points in two areas, attributes and perks. And since you're a cyborg, you can also purchase other modifications. These all come together to allow you to make the custom cyborg of your dreams. And once you pick it up, it really works well to allow you to tailor your character to your playstyle, which includes a plethora of weapon options as well. But decide carefully, as there will not be enough points to grab everything by the end. So choice is key here to tailor your experience. It's nice that the game offers so many variations of combat types to suit the player style. But the combat does suffer from a lot of bugs. Predictability, or sometimes just dumb enemy AI. The AI in general, I'd say, is pretty bad for NPCs and enemies, which unfortunately takes away from the environment. Grand Theft Auto sets the bar pretty high here to make their cities feel alive. And in this area, Cyberpunk is a little bit of a letdown. I got a little bored towards the end, as I spent time beefing up my V for the third act. So many of the side quests and enemies outside of the bosses were not posing a real challenge. However, I'll probably just crank up the difficulty on my next V. Controller vibration is good, not great. I feel like they could have spent more time in this area. But I do suggest you plug in an Xbox controller to your PC when playing this one. Driving can be a little rough to me. Unlike other GTA-like games, the map does not zoom out for turns. Or at least not by default, so I turn around a lot, which gets kind of annoying. Maybe I'm just a bad driver, or the controls could use some tweaking. But I don't feel too bad. Even NPC drivers seem to find this challenging. It's a shame the devs did not get more time to polish this one, because your immersion is broken as strange things happen. Like objects in the air, hard to hear dialogue at times over background music or sounds, strange voice changes. The oddities don't happen often, but when they do, you can end up laughing your way through what should be a dramatic scene. And I'm not sure if this is the game design or just polishing, but you get phone calls at the worst times. So I feel like this game had the potential for a 5 in gameplay, but I'm going to have to bump it down to a 3 due to some technical difficulties. I hope in a year I can review this again and bump the score up.
Hello there, Night City! Stanley here with you, and we got another day ahead of us in this city of dreams.
CD Projekt Red has a smart strategy of adopting properties to games. Cyberpunk was already a tabletop role-playing game from the late 80s by designer Mike Pondsmith. He was a consultant on Cyberpunk 2077, so the world and a lot of the lore was already established. And it's really worth a look if you want to see what led to the game world and setting of Night City. I'll leave some links to my favorite lore videos in the description. But those of us that were alive in the 80s can remember this vision of the future being a common theme in sci-fi at the time. The developers do a great job bringing this alive. Setting is key to the storyline of any game, and to be an epic title, you need to have a good world. Which is a real strength here that has players wanting to return to the streets of Night City and flex their style. So much so we can overlook the technical problems and lack of polish right now. So CD Projekt deserves a lot of credit for bringing this world alive, although it's smaller than you're led to believe it will be. With the atmosphere set, the game takes you on an episodic adventure unfolding in 3 acts. Along the way, similar to GTA style games, there's a lot of side quests. Many with their own stories or no story at all. In some cases I wish they dived deeper into because they're just as compelling as the main story. To a degree, V will form some relationships in the game, although I feel like it's a little shallow. And I'm just going to say it, I think they didn't leave enough romance options in the story. I'm more of a lover than a fighter, I guess. But I'm not sure the romances were as fulfilling as other games, and the payoff was minor to unlocking those paths. One romance I just found bizarre, as I just thought my male V was hanging out with some guy at the time. And even though I chose the friendship, not romance options, I found myself practically forced down a path of getting drunk and waking up the next morning and doing a walk of shame out of my friend's place. Which the same sequence I'm pretty sure happens if we did, stuff. It was just strange. Poorly written or executed, and it just made me feel awkward as a player. That being said, Night City is a complicated place with multiple stories going on within it. The problem here is a lot of them are just shallow and not entertaining at all. You'll find yourself doing them because you need money or to level up, but a good 80% of it I just kind of sat through, not really caring about how it moved the story or shaped this world, which is a shame. But let's talk about the main problem, which is the main storyline. It's the reason I felt one way about the game 20 hours in and changed my perception of what this game really is by the end. The main storyline is engaging enough to have you wanting to work through it to the end. And at the same time, you're not in a rush because you want to enjoy all the city has to offer. But as I worked through it, I felt less like this was an open world game where my choices impacted the storyline in a meaningful way. Instead, I felt very much like the story was on rails. You have a lot of options on how you might look and what you might buy while you're on this train, starting with the gender and 3 life paths for your character. But that only changes minor experiences, and for the most part, the side storylines will be the same. The real choices are made in the last act of the game, where you can unlock the possible endings. A couple of them will only be options if you did certain side storylines. I enjoyed playing through it and experiencing them all for myself, and the first time I really found myself caring about the outcome for my V. This game should be a strong foundation for future stories to be told through DLC. There's a lot to unpack here and many themes like corporate exploitation and classism that run through the Cyberpunk universe storylines. More so than I could cover in this video. And I haven't even touched on all the factions and gangs you'll encounter in Night City. Oh, and did I mention Keanu Reeves as a major character? Although the importance of playing his storyline really hampers the freedom to develop your own. So the story gets a 3 out of 5 for me. I like stories with layers to them and different twists that the player can control, which was a selling point here that was only partially realized. I also think it misses the mark on evoking emotion in parts where they want you to feel something.
You'll not get any tearful confessions out of me.
And again, bugs interrupt some of these scenes and break the immersion. I really enjoyed the music of this game, although I played it with a lot of the copyrighted tracks turned off for recording. But let's give them credit, because that was a thoughtful option for content creators. I think they picked a great soundtrack for the cyberpunk genre and Night City. When you're in a club or a street party, you might be tempted to start bopping. Sound effects are also convincing. And they spent some time recording fake commercials, news reports, and other elements to make the world come alive. However, some bugginess messes with the sound levels in some cinematics, which gets a little annoying. The voice acting is very good in this game, and Keanu Reeves gives a pretty convincing rocker boy performance.
Why'd you never try and fix me? Would I had to get in line, that's why.
NPCs have repetitive conversations you'll get tired of hearing. I hope the budget for good voice actors and an actual Hollywood actor did not take money from other developer aspects. But it comes together really well to tell the story. So for sound, Cyberpunk gets a 4 out of 5. However, if they fix these issues, I would give it a 5 out of 5.
Take care of yourself.
You too, Panham.
And remember, I'm indebted.
I like to talk about replayability in my reviews, because I think true masterpieces are games you want to play again and experience over and over. I think when you start this game, you know you're going to play it again, because you at least want to see what changes the life path will have on influencing the story, and possibly the gender and playstyle. I'm just not sure you'll care enough to finish playing it all the way through again, because once you realize you're on some pretty firm rails within an open world, I think that's going to get old pretty fast the second time around for some players. But putting that aside, and the problems aside, this is a fun game. Especially if you're a fan of the genre. The playground of the city and the toys you have at your disposal is engaging enough. and I'm excited to see what DLC can do for this game's replayability. But that's another video about what I think we need to see there to push this title higher. In its current form, this adventure game, masquerading around as an open world RPG, is going to get a 3 out of 5 for replayability. Again, this is an area that I think can be improved, so I'd like to look at it again when more content is released. I'm sure this release will be talked about in business schools and gaming circles for years to come. But releasing unfinished games is not unique to CD Projekt Red. Look at how many early access games are out now. This is just the worst case I can think of. But it's common now to receive games from big publishers that need huge updates and patches when you first get them. So much so that I think it's become a common practice in the industry. This is just the most extreme case I can think of. I think CD Projekt Red has a good reputation for their world-building games, but The Witcher 3 also had a rocky technical launch, so I think they have a lot of work to do here in terms of public perception. But that's a whole other video for when the dust settles. I will say that you can't hold a good game down though, and the developers, directors, and actors involved deserve a lot of credit because this is a great game. If a game like No Man's Sky, which debuted missing many of the features that were promised, was able to turn things around, so can Cyberpunk 2077. I think there's a strong enough foundation here that can serve as a platform for a multiplayer online MMO-like experience. And that can really fully realize the vision many of us thought this title would be. However, if you can run the game that is here right now, I think you'll enjoy hours of gameplay. Cyberpunk 2077 initially got a 20 out of 25 from me for a B- rating. But as my feelings evolved on how the open world and storyline were implemented, coupled with how I felt that affected the replay factor, my score dropped to an 18 out of 25 for a C- rating. I think this is partially due to the hype of what a next-generation action RPG would look like and what was actually delivered, coupled with the rough technical issues that affected presentation. I'm confident in a year, if I take another look at Cyberpunk 2077, the rating will be higher. Despite the mediocre score, I would definitely recommend buying this game. So if you're looking for a game with mirrors, cyborgs, dancing, sex, and violence, this might be the game for you. And what I hope will be a platform for continued storytelling. If you're playing it now, what do you think? If you're on the fence, I hope this review has been helpful. I hope to bring you more sci-fi game reviews alongside my usual Star Citizen content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.